Are you willing to die for Christ? It's easy to say yes now, but do you think you could actually do it? Could you do it if you had great wealth, prominence, and fame? Would you still be willing to die for your faith? That's a question that many Christians have had to answer. Some have answered yes. They echo the Apostle Paul's words, "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." They may proclaim that the treasures of heaven far outweigh the treasures of earth. Their hearts and treasures stored up in heaven, not on earth where moth and rust destroy. Demetrius was no different. Here is a man who loved God, devoted all he did to God, and would ultimately die for God. In the face of great persecution, shame, and torment, Demetrius stood firm in his faith, ultimately fulfilling Paul's words, "To die is gain." Hi, my name is Clayton, and you're listening to the Imitators series, a production of the Isaiah 43 Ministries. The words of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 are a powerful reminder to all Christians. Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. These words are an invitation to follow in the footsteps of those who have gone before us, paving the way to a more meaningful and fulfilling spiritual journey as followers of Christ. Throughout history, countless individuals have taken up this challenge and lived lives that reflect the teachings of Jesus. From apologists to politicians, soldiers to theologians, and parents to authors, these inspiring figures have shown us what it means to truly follow Christ. Join us as we explore their stories and discover how we too can become better imitators of Christ. Demetrius was born in the 3rd century. Although we don't know the exact year or day, some records compiled later suggest that Demetrius was born around 270 AD. He was born in Thessalonica, the same city where the Apostle Paul would have written his epistles, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 220 years prior. It was a bustling city of the Roman Empire, with a deep, rich history connected to Alexander the Great. The significance of this great city cannot be overstated, especially in young Demetrius' life. The city was an urban center where trade, politics, and culture were intertwined, promoted, and discussed. The ports were filled with travelers and merchants from faraway lands. The city was a true melting pot of ideas. Because of all the diversity and culture, there was no shortage of great stories, diverse beliefs, and riches. Philosophers and scholars lined the streets debating various topics. Merchants sold all kinds of exotic products. Priests from various religions preached their messages as well. Like much of the Roman Empire at the time, the city contained a lot of pagan worship. The main god in the city was Kybris, but there were dedications to Zeus, Dionysus, and Aphrodite. Even Caesar was worshipped as a god. But Kybris was different for the Thessalonians, and we'll see why in just a moment. Demetrius was born to nobility, a very distinguished family in the province of Macedonia. Because of this, Roman culture dictated that Demetrius must absolutely uphold the family honor and legacy. He must continue the lineage. He must learn the ways of the Roman elites by learning their traditions, values, and how to present himself in society. But it's also the Thessalonian nobility that particularly cherished their god, Cabrius. The Thessalonian nobility believed that Cabrius had been martyred. He was killed and was expected to return to deliver them from weakness. The Thessalonian nobility thought that Christ was an impostor, a counterfeit to the role that Cabrius was meant to fulfill. And yet this nobility also believed that Cabrius only cared about them. Cabrius cared nothing for the ordinary commoners, or if he did, it was very little. Because of this, many of the people rejected Cabrius and believed in Christ instead, because he was a real person who had actually been killed and resurrected. In a way, the dichotomy of paganism and Christianity in Thessalonica was represented on a larger scale throughout the entirety of the Roman Empire. The entire Roman Empire was changing. Christianity was becoming a powerful, unstoppable force. The pagans and the Christians contended with one another often. So Rome hadn't officially legalized Christianity yet, and so it remained a persecuted religion. We don't have much information on the exact details of Demetrius' life, early life that is. Some records suggest that Demetrius' parents may have been Christian. Some indicate that his family may have been rulers, such as the governor, senators, or another high-ranking position in the local government. However, we simply just don't know that much. But what we do know is that as Demetrius grew up, he received a formal education in rhetoric, philosophy, and military strategy. Demetrius soon pursued a career in the military. In the Greco-Roman culture that he was raised in, this is how one grew to fame and prominence. While Demetrius was skilled and capable, it didn't hurt that he also had a famous family. During this time of Roman history, the East was ruled by Galerius Maximin, essentially a junior emperor, the second only to Diocletian. Very quickly, Demetrius came to a very high-ranking position under Galerius, sitting in as a member of his war council. He led troops, discussed diplomacy, and debated politics with the capital. If Demetrius went off to combat or traveled, we don't necessarily have a record of it. But we do have that Galerius ultimately made Thessalonica his capital. He chose Demetrius to line up the defenses, troop movement, and to take care of internal and external threats and revolts. At some point in his life, perhaps young if the theories of his parents being Christians are true, Demetrius converted to Christianity and took his faith extremely seriously. He was greatly influenced by the teaching of the early church and the early martyrs. By all accounts, he took this very seriously, so much so that it is said that it was a central part of his identity, which in the pagan Roman Empire was not an easy thing. The Roman Empire often conducted state pagan rituals and ceremonies, which conflicted with what Demetrius believed, and as such, he refused to partake. For example, upon returning to Thessalonica for a victory celebration, Emperor Maximin, the very same junior emperor that Demetrius served under, organized pagan games and sacrifices. He did this for entertainment and to showcase the superiority of the Roman gods, to show the new emerging Christians that the Roman gods were better. Demetrius publicly refused to participate. Maybe he remembered and was encouraged by Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 10, verses 32 and 33. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. Because of this, many conflicted with Demetrius. It was not something he was ashamed of, as it was the power of salvation for all who believed. And since the world loved darkness rather than light, Demetrius, despite being high in the Roman military, now had a target on his back. The pagan Romans denounced him publicly. They claimed that it was a direct defiance of the emperor's command, authority, and will. And yet, in the ever-growing and expanding Roman Empire, Demetrius used every opportunity at his disposal to evangelize. The traditional Roman pantheon was being questioned by this new generation. Perhaps they knew they were searching for something spiritual, but the pagan gods offered them nothing. So Demetrius used this opportunity and engaged in theological debates. This message connected with many pagans. And as for believing Christians, Demetrius' words and actions inspired them to stand firm in the face of adversity. It wouldn't be long before Demetrius would have to put his own words to the test. Shortly after refusing to participate in the Roman games and rituals, Demetrius was arrested and thrown into prison for treason and sedition against the empire. They had had enough of his refusal to participate in his Christian faith. He had gone on for many years preaching in the name of Christ when they saw Christ and Christians as a threat to their power. He may have been told not to preach in that name anymore and to recognize the power and authority of the emperor and the Roman gods instead. It's almost reminiscent of Peter and the apostles standing before the high priest and council in Acts chapter 5, verses 28 and 29, which reads, saying, "We strictly charged you not to teach in this name. Yet here you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you intend to bring this man's blood upon us." But Peter and the apostles answered, "We must obey God rather than men." They were determined to make an example out of him. So while in prison, they demanded that he renounce his faith, reject Christ, and adopt the Roman gods again. He refused. So the Romans began torturing him. According to tradition, he endured various kinds of terrible punishment, which the Romans were expert masters of. Remarkably, he never renounced or rejected Christ. The Roman authorities thought they would surely end the Christians' influence and numbers by locking him away. He'd be cut off from the people he ministered to and taught. Without him, they believed, the Christian movement in Thessalonica would lose momentum and fall apart. Yet, in fact, his imprisonment and torture had a strange opposite effect. The people of Thessalonica actually came to his prison cell and visited him and listened to him preach. His prison cell became a testament to his faith. His source of shame and pain was actually used by God. His story spreads very quickly, and the numbers who came to his cell grew larger and larger, as Christians and non-believers alike came to see and hear his message. One such visitor actually became fairly well known. A young Christian who had been converted and taught by Demetrius, named Nestor, visited Demetrius in his cell. Nestor sought Demetrius' blessing. Why? Well, you see, there was a pagan warrior named Laios. He was said to have been a giant of a man, a huge warrior who represented the pagan strength of the empire, who challenged Christians to combat and then made a sport out of their deaths. He claimed each victory he achieved was a symbol of the Roman pantheon conquering the Christian God. Nestor wanted to go fight him and end this, but he would not go without Demetrius' blessing. Demetrius gave his approval, though we may not know the specific reasons why, and can only speculate that it was to show how great our God is. Even Emperor Maximin tried to convince Nestor not to fight. He knew how small and frail Nestor looked compared to Laios. He thought it'd be an instant slaughter. But as Nestor went to battle, he prayed for God's help. Nestor went away from Demetrius' prison cell and prepared to fight in the arena. Nestor, in a David versus Goliath parallel, defeated the mighty Laios and afterwards gave thanks to God. The Romans could not have this. Their champion had been slaughtered. Their pagan pantheon was shown to be nothing. They were embarrassed. The Roman authorities immediately seized Nestor, took him to the edge of the city, and beheaded him with his own sword. The emperor may have killed Nestor, but he knew that wouldn't dissuade Christians, so he needed to go to the source of this. He turned his attention to Demetrius, who was still remaining in his prison cell and still preaching. His cell was his pulpit. He'd become a beacon of hope and resistance for Christians everywhere. As long as he lived, he would be a symbol. The emperor and the other leading authorities took note from the rest of the empire. You see, a widespread persecution had begun, and so they decided they would make an example. While leaving him in his prison cell, the Roman authorities gathered various troops outside of his prison cell. The troops began impaling him with their spears. Even Demetrius' servant was not spared. After his martyrdom, Demetrius' servant, Lupus, gathered Demetrius' blood-stained tunic and his signet ring. The Romans tracked him down, and as well as the items, and beheaded Lupus as well. As one source notes, quote, "The martyrdom of Demetrius, in particular, left an indelible mark on the Christian community of Thessaloniki and beyond. His death, rather than silencing his message, amplified it. Stories of his life, teachings, and ultimate sacrifice spread, turning him into a legendary figure in Christian lore. In the annals of Christian history, martyrdom holds a special place. It is a reminder of the sacrifices made by countless individuals for their beliefs, the challenges they faced, and the indomitable spirit with which they confronted adversity. Demetrius of Thessaloniki, with his noble lineage, military prominence, and unwavering faith, epitomizes this spirit of sacrifice and resilience. End quote. Today, Demetrius of Thessaloniki, as he's known by the Orthodox Church, or Demetrios of Thessalonica, as he is known by the Catholic Church, is regarded as a patron saint. A basilica was built in the 5th century in his honor, roughly 100 years or so after his death. But I wanted to share something different. Why do I share the story of Demetrius of Thessaloniki? I mean, when we've done the Imitators series, he's a little bit of an outlier in the sense of he's probably the oldest and most obscure person we've ever taken a look at. So something has to be up with him, right? Oh yeah. I have a personal connection to Demetrius of Thessalonica. A few years ago, a mentor of mine gave me a gift. It was a large canvas painting of a person in red, holding a cross, a sword, and a shield. My mentor explained to me that this was Demetrius of Thessaloniki. As I was very appreciative, I flipped the canvas over and saw a very interesting sticker on the back of it. The sticker read, "Product of the Soviet Union." My mentor began to explain to me how much he had paid for it while he had been in the Soviet Union, as well as the significance of Demetrius. It's more significant when you understand what was going on in the Soviet Union at the time that my mentor bought this canvas. You see, religious iconography, art, and symbolism was extremely outlawed and persecuted in the Soviet Union. You couldn't even own a Bible. Little things like this canvas of Demetrius, would have been cherished deeply, but also hid very secretively. It's no wonder that this Demetrius canvas was found in the Soviet Union. Demetrius' whole life had been a symbol of faith, hope, and perseverance in the face of extreme government persecution. All these centuries later, after Demetrius' martyrdom, he still continued to inspire someone in the Soviet Union to hold on to their faith as the most precious jewel, stand for what they believed in, even if they were killed for it, and never stop preaching the gospel unashamed, because it is the power of salvation to all who believe. To those who are neither Catholic nor Orthodox, Demetrius' story serves as a reminder and an inspiration. His life and legacy reminds us that, for to me, to live is Christ and die is gain. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Imitators series. Let us close with these words from Jesus. "So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven."